A man walked into a Vienna hospital in 1917, believing he was getting treatment for his failing mind. Instead, doctors deliberately injected him with blood from a malaria-infected soldier. Within weeks, his body temperature spiked to 105 degrees Fahrenheit as parasites ravaged his bloodstream. He survived the malaria, but died anyway. This wasn't medical malpractice, it was cutting-edge treatment that would win a Nobel Prize while killing 15% of patients who received it. Before antibiotics existed, syphilis was a death sentence that drove people insane. By 1917, psychiatric hospitals were overflowing with victims of this sexually transmitted plague. Julius Wagner-Jahreg, an Austrian psychiatrist, made a shocking decision. He would fight one deadly disease with another. His gamble would save thousands of lives and create one of history's most controversial medical treatments. This is the story of malaria-therapy, when doctors played God with two killers, and patients paid the ultimate price for medical progress. In 1900, syphilis earned the title Disease of the Century. It stalked victims for decades before delivering its final devastating blow. The disease began innocently with painless sores that disappeared, creating false hope. Years later, it returned with widespread rashes and fever. Then came the cruelest part, a silent period lasting decades while bacteria invaded the nervous system. The final stage, called general paresis of the insane, turned psychiatric hospitals into houses of horror. These patients experienced violent seizures, uncontrollable rage, and vivid hallucinations. Some believed they were Napoleon or God. Others screamed at invisible demons. All faced the same fate: progressive paralysis and death within 5 years. The numbers were merciless. Of everyone infected with syphilis, 28% developed serious complications. 6.5% suffered brain involvement. For those reaching the final neurological stage, the mortality rate approached 100%. Families watched their loved ones transform from functioning adults into raving madmen. Medical treatments were equally horrifying. For over 400 years, doctors rubbed patients with mercury ointment near fires in scorching hot rooms. The process often killed through mercury poisoning faster than syphilis itself. A popular saying captured the grim reality: a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. Paul Ehrlich's 1910 discovery of salvarsan offered hope for early-stage syphilis, but proved useless against advanced brain infections. By the time patients reached the asylum with their minds failing, even arsenic compounds couldn't penetrate deep enough to halt the bacterial rampage. This was the desperate landscape that shaped Wagner-Jahreg's radical thinking. Julius Wagner-Jahreg never planned to become psychiatry's most controversial figure. Born in 1857 in Austria, he only entered psychiatry after being rejected for internal medicine positions. He later admitted he had never previously considered becoming a psychiatrist. But in 1883, Wagner-Jahreg witnessed something that would obsess him for 34 years. A woman with severe psychosis was completely cured after contracting erysipelas, a bacterial skin infection that caused high fever. The case stuck with Wagner-Jahreg and planted the seed of fever therapy. His logic seemed simple yet terrifying. If high fevers could cure psychosis, perhaps sustained fever could kill the heat-sensitive bacteria causing brain syphilis. In 1887, he published his theory, proposing malaria as the ideal fever-inducing disease because doctors could interrupt it at will using quinine. For 30 years, Wagner-Jahreg experimented with safer alternatives. He tried tuberculosis vaccines, typhoid injections, and bacterial toxins. None produced the sustained high fevers needed. His controlled study of 69 patients showed minimal improvement. When he presented findings at the 1909 International Medical Congress, he met great skepticism from the medical establishment. Then World War I provided the crucial element he needed: an infected human carrier. Before we continue with Wagner-Jahreg's breakthrough experiment, Make sure you're subscribed to stay updated on more shocking medical history stories like this one. June 14, 1917, marked one of medicine's most audacious moments. Wagner Jauregg had access to blood from a wounded soldier admitted to his Vienna clinic with shell shock and malaria from the Macedonian front. Here was his chance to test the ultimate fever therapy. Wagner Jauregg selected 9 patients with general paralysis, men facing certain death within months. He injected them with the soldier's malaria-infected blood. The procedure was deceptively simple. A subcutaneous injection of infected blood containing deadly parasites. What followed was a carefully orchestrated dance with death that lasted weeks. The infection phase took 7 to 14 days as malaria parasites established themselves in the bloodstream. Patients then endured 8 to 12 malarial episodes, fever spikes reaching 105 degrees Fahrenheit over 6 to 8 weeks. Each fever cycle brought intense shaking chills, drenching sweats, and delirium as body temperatures spiked high enough to kill syphilis bacteria. Hospitals established dedicated units with specialized monitoring. Nurses checked temperatures every 2 to 4 hours using mercury thermometers, while doctors performed blood tests to monitor parasite levels. The goal was maintaining therapeutic fever while preventing malaria from killing the patient, a balance requiring constant vigilance. Wagner Jauregg preferred one strain of malaria over deadlier versions because it killed only 5 to 10% of patients versus up to 15% with other strains. Once the prescribed fever episodes occurred, physicians administered quinine to terminate the malaria infection. The cruel irony was that patients who survived malaria had to wait months to discover if the treatment worked. Syphilis improvement often appeared 6 to 12 months after malaria ended. The results exceeded Wagner Jauregg's most optimistic expectations. Of the 9 patients, 6 showed extensive recovery, and 3 remained working 4 years later. 1 patient died from malaria complications, 2 returned to asylums, but the 6 who improved represented a medical miracle, the first effective treatment for an otherwise fatal disease. Wagner Jauregg captured the breakthrough in his own words. The result was gratifying beyond expectation. 6 of these 9 cases showed extensive remission, and in 3 cases, the remission proved enduring. The human stories behind these statistics reveal both medical triumph and tragedy. At one Brazilian hospital, physicians treated 454 patients between 1929 and 1939, erecting a bronze memorial plaque reading, "To Wagner Jauregg, from those who came back to their families and society through malariotherapy." But the mortality statistics tell a grimmer story. In Brazil's first year of treatment, 63% of patients died, 12 deaths out of 19 cases. The technique improved with experience, but overall mortality remained high when including both malaria deaths and treatment failures. At hospitals across Europe and America, physicians tracked hundreds of cases. 14 patients required premature treatment termination due to complications, daily fever spikes without recovery, severe diarrhea, anemia, exhaustion, pneumonia, jaundice, and kidney infections. Many died within 1 month of malaria injection. Yet for families watching loved ones descend into syphilitic madness, even these odds represented hope. International reviews showed 27% of patients achieved great improvement, and 25% showed mild improvement. Remarkable results for a previously incurable disease. December 10, 1927 marked Wagner Jauregg's vindication when he became the first psychiatrist to win the Nobel Prize in medicine. The presentation captured the dramatic irony. There is a saying, "One must expel evil with evil," that might aptly describe his treatment. He healed mental patients by infecting them with another disease, malaria. The recognition triggered global adoption. By the mid-1920s, malariotherapy spread across Europe, North and South America, South Africa, Asia, and beyond. Hospitals established mosquito farms and maintained malaria cultures through continuous human-to-human blood transmission. Wagner-Jaureg's Vienna clinic preserved their strain through over 200 human passages from 1919. The logistics were extraordinary. Hospitals successfully shipped malaria-infected blood internationally by airmail, demonstrating the lengths physicians went to bring this treatment worldwide. Medical centers developed mosquito-proof facilities while debating whether to use live mosquitoes versus blood injection. But Wagner-Jaureg's triumph was shadowed by ethical concerns that would ultimately tarnish his legacy. Malariotherapy flourished when medical paternalism reigned supreme. Patients rarely understood they were being deliberately infected with a potentially fatal disease. Informed consent, as we know, it didn't exist. The prevailing philosophy held that desperate diseases justified desperate remedies, with physicians making unilateral life-and-death decisions. The ethical problems were staggering: deliberately inducing disease, accepting 15% mortality rates, treating vulnerable psychiatric patients unable to consent, and using experimental procedures without oversight. One Nobel Committee member initially refused to award Wagner-Jaureg the prize, calling him a criminal for injecting malaria into paralyzed patients. Wagner-Jaureg's later political sympathies further complicate his legacy. After Austria joined Nazi Germany in 1938, he supported the Nazi Party and advocated forced sterilization. During World War I, he had applied extreme electric shock therapy to soldiers claiming battle fatigue, causing large numbers of deaths, a practice that led to post-war investigations. The ethical landscape of early 20th century medicine allowed practices considered criminal today. Hospitals maintained source patients, individuals kept infected with malaria to provide blood for new treatments. The system essentially created a class of permanently infected people serving as living reservoirs for therapeutic parasites. Malariotherapy's acceptance partly stemmed from horrific alternatives available. Mercury treatment involved months of toxic exposure, often proving fatal faster than syphilis itself. Patients were confined to hot rooms, rubbed with mercury ointment near fires, and subjected to mercury vapor treatments causing severe mouth ulcers, tooth loss, kidney failure, and death from mercury poisoning. Against this backdrop of medical futility, malariotherapy's 27% success rate seemed miraculous despite its 15% mortality rate. The malariotherapy era ended with shocking suddenness when penicillin transformed syphilis from a death sentence to a simple cure. Alexander Fleming's 1928 discovery remained largely academic until mass production began in 1943. The breakthrough came when researchers achieved spectacular results curing syphilis patients using penicillin injections. The outcomes were revolutionary: 95% cure rates across all syphilis stages, minimal side effects, and simple injection protocols replacing weeks of dangerous fever therapy. The impact was immediate and global. Syphilis cases fell 95% in some countries within a decade, while penicillin became standard treatment by 1947. Hospitals dismantled their malaria cultures and mosquito farms virtually overnight. The elaborate infrastructure supporting malariotherapy, specialized wards, source patients, fever monitoring protocols, became obsolete within months. Wagner-Jaureg, who died in 1940, never witnessed his Nobel Prize-winning treatment's rapid obsolescence. By 1950, malariotherapy had virtually disappeared, leaving only scattered case reports as reminders of medicine's most dramatic therapeutic gamble. The bronze memorial plaque at that Brazilian hospital, "From those who came back to their families and society through malariotherapy," captures both the treatment's promise and tragedy. For every patient who returned home cured, others died from the very treatment meant to save them. Wagner-Jaureg's willingness to use one deadly disease against another foreshadowed modern approaches where controlled infections treat cancer and autoimmune diseases. The rapid transition from malaria-therapy to penicillin demonstrates how quickly medical paradigms shift when superior treatments emerge. Perhaps most importantly, malaria-therapy's ethical controversies contributed to modern bioethics development. The practice influenced post-war developments, including international medical codes and informed consent requirements. What began as desperate medicine ultimately helped establish the patient rights we consider fundamental today. But here's what's truly disturbing about this story. While Wagner Jaureg won the Nobel Prize for deliberately infecting patients with malaria, recent evidence suggests his methods were even more controversial than previously known. Documents discovered in Austrian archives reveal experiments he conducted during wartime that make malaria therapy look tame by comparison.